The blizzard isn't just falling. It is a solid wall of white, erasing Lake Placid. Inside an isolated cabin, a suspended detective drinks by the fire. But his retired K-9 partner, Kilo, is not at ease. He isn't whining. He isn't barking at the wind. He is howling. A frantic, terrified sound aimed directly at the dark, frozen forest behind the cabin. Out there beneath a heavy pine, a 7-year-old boy is using his last body heat as a living shield. He is kneeling over 2 infant carriers, his thin pajamas frozen solid to his skin. He dragged them here on a small red sled. This detective thinks he's fighting a blizzard. He's wrong. He's about to enter a war where the only witness is a child and his only true partner is his dog. Lake Placid wasn't just cold. It was being unmade. The nor'easter had settled over the town with the physical weight of a tombstone. The wind was a high-pitched file scraping against the glass of the isolated cabin, searching for a way in. Miles from the nearest plowed road, Detective Jack Coulter watched the world dissolve into chaotic, swirling white. At 38, he was a man running on fumes. Anger, cheap whiskey, and the dregs of a career on ice. The suspension felt more like an execution. His badge was in a drawer, his service weapon locked up. He'd pushed and the system, Tom Fawn, Evelyn Hayes, and her golden boy Marcus Thorne, had pushed back harder. So he sat trapped by the blizzard and his own simmering rage. Across the room, his only company stirred. Kilo, his retired K-9 partner, was a 9-year-old German shepherd, a magnificent animal of intimidating size. His black and tan coat thick against the winter. A thin white scar bisected his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a meth lab raid. In retirement, Kilo was a creature of profound calm. Tonight he was not calm. He'd been restless for an hour, huffing and pacing the floorboards. Now he stood rigid, his head low, muscles bunching in his powerful shoulders. The shift was electric. The retiree vanished. The K-9 was on duty. His gaze was locked on the back door, the one that faced the endless storm-blasted forest. Kilo let out a single explosive woof. It wasn't a bark. It was a percussive sound, felt more than heard. Designed to alert a partner to a threat. "Stand down," Jack mumbled, his voice thick. "It's the storm, Kilo. Nothing's out there." Kilo ignored him. He moved to the back door and began to scratch with frantic, splintering urgency. He barked again, a rapid, high-pitched cadence that Jack hadn't heard in years. It was his man-down alert. "Kilo. Enough." Jack snapped, rising from his chair. The dog backed away from the door, turned, and stared Jack dead in the eyes. Then he howled. It wasn't the lonely, mournful call of a wolf. It was an alarm, a desperate, intelligent, human-like summons that cut straight through Jack's alcoholic haze and pierced his heart with a needle of pure ice. Kilo did not make mistakes. If Kilo said someone was out there, the whiskey was forgotten. In 30 seconds, Jack was pulling on insulated boots, his tactical winter jacket, and grabbing the high-lumen mag light from the mantel. He unlatched the deadbolt, and the wind tore the heavy door from his hand. He was met by a solid wall of white. It wasn't snow. It was an abrasive airborne ice that blasted his face and stole his breath. "Kilo, find," he roared over the shriek of the storm. The dog didn't hesitate. He bounded off the porch and vanished. A bark cut through the white, and Jack plunged in after it. It was like walking through frozen cement. The wind chill was lethal, and the snow was hip-deep in drifts. He couldn't see his own feet. His flashlight beam was a joke, illuminating nothing but the sheer blinding chaos. He was operating on pure faith, navigating by sound, following the barks that were already being shredded by the gale. "Speak, Kilo." A bark to his right. He pushed through low-hanging branches that felt like iron bars, his lungs burning. This wasn't a rescue. It was a recovery. No one could survive this for more than 20 minutes. Kilo's barks changed. They stopped moving and became frantic, localized yips. He'd found it. Jack pushed through a final curtain of snow-laden pine boughs and stopped, his heart seizing in his chest. His flashlight beam cut through the vortex and found the scene. At the base of a massive blue spruce, Kilo was digging furiously, sending up plumes of white. Jack panned the light down and saw a shape, a small hunched mound already half buried. "Oh God," Jack breathed, lurching forward, sliding the last few feet on his knees. It was a boy, no older than 7. He was wearing only thin Spider-Man pajamas and a soaked, unzipped hoodie, his skin a terrifying shade of blue. He was on his knees, his body curled forward in a desperate dome, shivering so violently it seemed his bones would break. He was shielding something. "It's okay, son. I'm here to help," Jack shouted, his voice cracking. He grabbed the boy's shoulder to pull him back, but the child's arms were locked rigid. His frozen hands clamped onto something beneath him. A low, rattling moan escaped his lips. He was alive. Jack gently forced his numb fingers under the boy's chest and pulled him back. Underneath that frail, heroic shield, Jack's beam found the source of Kilo's desperate alarm. 2 small, portable infant carriers. They were almost completely buried. Jack ripped one open, then the other. Inside, 2 tiny pale faces, one for each carrier. Twins. Their eyes were closed, their breathing terrifyingly shallow. As Jack's light scanned the area, it caught a sliver of bright red plastic sticking out of the drift just feet away. A child's snow sled. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The boy hadn't just wandered out here. He had dragged them. He had pulled his infant siblings on a plastic sled through a blizzard into the woods until he couldn't take another step. And then he had used his own body as their last, final shelter. The 50 yards back to the cabin was a journey through hell. Adrenaline and training took over, silencing the shock, reducing the world to a single primal objective: shelter. Jack grabbed the 2 infant carriers and looped them over one forearm. With his other arm, he scooped up the boy. Leo was terrifyingly light, but his body was rigid, his limbs locked in a state of advanced hypothermia, as stiff as frozen wood. "Kilo, lead home," Jack roared into the wind. The shepherd understood the command, bounding ahead, his powerful body creating a dark, fleeting path in the whiteout, his barks a rhythmic beacon guiding Jack through the blinding chaos. The carriers banged against Jack's legs, throwing him off balance. He fell to one knee, the impact jarring the breath from his lungs, but he was up in a second, pushing forward, fueled by a ferocious, protective rage. He burst through the back door, kicked it shut with his heel, and the world was suddenly violently silent. The storm reduced to a distant, muffled scream. He didn't waste a second. He laid Leo on the thick bearskin rug near the hearth, close enough for the radiant heat, but not close enough to cause the agonizing shock of rapid rewarming. He set the carriers beside the boy. "Kilo, watch," he ordered. The dog immediately stood over the 3 children, a living, breathing guardian, his gaze fixed on the door Jack had just entered. Jack's training kicked in. Triage. He went to Leo first. The Spider-Man pajamas were frozen solid, a crust of ice and fabric. Tearing them off would rip the boy's skin. He ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and carefully slit the material, peeling it away from the pale, marbled skin. He wrapped the boy in the driest, warmest thing he had, the heavy wool blanket from his own bed. He turned to the twins. He pulled them from the carriers, his heart in his throat. Their tiny onesies were cold and damp. He stripped them, his large, rough hand surprisingly gentle, and wrapped each infant in a thick bath towel, rubbing their chests and backs, trying to stimulate circulation. They were terrifyingly still, their faces pale, their lips a dusky blue. He put his ear to their chests. A breath, faint, shallow, but there. "Kilo," seeing Jack occupied with the infants, moved with purpose. He nudged the blanket-wrapped form of Leo, then carefully, deliberately lay down, pressing his entire 90 pounds fur-covered body against the boy's back. He was a living furnace, AK-9's final duty, sharing his own life's heat. Jack worked for what felt like an eternity, rubbing the tiny limbs of the infants, whispering, "Come on, stay with me," over and over. He saw the first sign of life as Leo's shivering, which had been frighteningly violent, began to ease into a more controlled, shuddering tremor. Color was returning to his face. Then the boy's eyes snapped open. It wasn't a gentle waking. It was a convulsive gasp, a jolt of pure, adrenalized terror. "No," he screamed, his voice a dry croak. "No, don't take them. Leave us alone." He scrambled, his movements weak and uncoordinated, his eyes wide and unfocused, seeing not Jack, but the threat he had fled. His hands searched frantically. "My bag. Where is it?" Jack pointed to the small dinosaur-themed backpack he had tossed by the door. "It's right there, son. It's okay." Leo lunged for it, dragging the wool blanket with him, and clutched the backpack to his chest as if it were a life raft, his knuckles white. "Hey, you're safe," Jack said, keeping his voice low and steady. "My name is Jack. I'm a police officer. You're safe here." The boy's panicked eyes darted around the room, finally landing on the German Shepherd. The terror in his gaze softened, replaced by a flicker of exhausted recognition. "Kilo," he whispered. Kilo, hearing his name, lifted his heavy head from the rug and licked the boy's frozen hand. That single gesture broke the spell. The boy's rigid posture collapsed and a dry, ragged sob tore from his chest. "Mom. Mom said Kilo would find me." Jack knelt, his heart cracking. "Leo, is that your name?" The boy nodded, still clutching the bag. "Leo, what happened? Where is your mom?" The boy's face crumpled. We had to hide." "Hide from who, Leo?" Leo's body tensed again, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "From Uncle Marcus." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne. His suspension, his investigation, it all crystallized in a sickening flash of clarity. This wasn't a random family lost in the storm. This was the very case that had cost him his career. "What did he do, Leo?" He pushed Mom," Leo whispered, tears freezing on his pale cheeks. "She fell down. She was bleeding. She gave me the bag. She put Noah and Luna on the sled." Jack could picture it. Amelia, his confidential informant, the woman who had been feeding him documents about Thorne's financial crimes, now gravely injured. "She told me," Leo choked out, "run. Run to Officer Coulter's cabin. Don't stop. Don't let him get the bag." He held up the dinosaur backpack. "She said, Kilo will find you. He'll protect you." Jack finally understood. Amelia hadn't just been sending her kids to safety. She had been sending him the evidence. The one thing Marcus would kill for. His suspension wasn't just procedural. It was a strategic move by Thorne and Judge Hayes to isolate him, to cut Amelia off from her only lifeline. And in her last desperate act, she had sent her children on a suicide mission through a blizzard, trusting that his suspended, disgraced K-9 partner would do what the entire police department couldn't, protect them. The immediate crisis of the cold was stabilizing. Leo was wrapped in fresh blankets, sipping lukewarm water Jack had given him. The twins were swaddled, their skin slowly turning from blue to a pale mottled pink. The cabin was quiet again. The only sounds, the crackling fire and the howl of the wind. Then Jack heard it, a new sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a tiny wet clicking sound. A high-pitched gasp. He looked down at the two towel-wrapped bundles. Noah was breathing quietly, but Luna, her tiny chest was retracting with every breath, her nostrils flaring. It was a desperate high-pitched wheeze. Her lips, which had turned pink, were starting to look dusky again. Jack wasn't a doctor, but he'd seen enough trauma to know respiratory distress. Pneumonia. The air she had inhaled in the storm. It was setting in fast. They had survived the freezing. They were about to die from the thaw. Jack looked at the silent dark shortwave radio in the corner, his only hope. His eyes locked on the heavy obsolete piece of metal and vacuum tubes. It was an analog anchor in a digital world, a relic he kept for nostalgia. Tonight, it was his only shot. "Leo, stay with Kilo," Jack commanded, his voice tight. The boy, wrapped in a mound of wool blankets, nodded, his wide, terrified eyes fixed on the struggling infant. Kilo didn't move, a 90-pound guardian, his body pressed against the boy's, his gaze unwavering from the windows. Jack threw the switch on the radio's power supply. Nothing. The cabin's generator was laboring against the storm, the lights flickering. The radio needed clean, stable power. He swore, kicking the desk, then remembered. He dove into a closet, pulling out a hand-crank generator, a piece of survivalist gear he'd bought on a whim. He plugged it in and began to crank, his arm burning, the cabin filling with the whine of the dynamo and the static-laced hiss of the receiver. He grabbed the microphone, his thumb jamming the talk button. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," he yelled over the static, his voice cracking. "This is Detective Jack Coulter, badge 941, operating blind from my personal cabin. Coordinates 44 degrees 15 minutes north." He rattled off the location he knew by heart. "I have a medical emergency. 3 children, hypothermia. 2 infants. 1 infant, female, in acute respiratory distress. I need medical evac. I need help now." He released the button. The cabin was filled with the roar of static. The storm was a blanket of electromagnetic noise, suffocating any signal. He broadcast again and a third time. Nothing but the sound of the storm mocking him. He was about to slam his fist on the desk when a voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the hiss. "Coulter, is that you? You sound like hell." The voice was female, laced with impatience and a steel wire intensity. Jack almost sobbed in relief. "Sarah. Sarah, thank God. I need you." Across the frozen expanse, 5 miles over the ridge, Dr. Sarah Jenkins kicked the leg of her workbench. She'd been up for 30 hours fighting to save a premature calf born in the heart of the storm. The radio call had blasted through her barn, interrupting the fragile quiet. She had recognized Jack Coulter's voice instantly, the arrogant, suspended cop who lived like a hermit on the next mountain. She didn't like him, but she respected his K-9, and she heard the panic in his voice, a sound she'd never heard from him before. "Infants? Plural," she snapped into her own transmitter. "Yes, 2. And a 7-year-old boy. The girl, Sarah, she's not breathing right. I think it's pneumonia." There was a long, cold silence. "I'm a vet, Jack, not a pediatrician. You're all I've got," he pleaded. "They won't last till the plows get here. They won't last another hour." Another crackle of static followed by a deep, weary sigh. "Keep them warm. Don't, damn it, don't feed them. If they're aspirating, you'll kill them. I'm coming." Jenkins out. In her barn, Sarah moved with an economy of motion that was almost violent. She was a woman in her early 50s, tall and sinewy, built from the kind of lean, weathered material the mountains themselves were made of. Her face was all angles and sharp observations. Her skin chapped red by the wind. Her eyes, a startling pale gray that had seen too much hard work and too many hard winters. She wasn't a gentle woman. She was a practical one. She grabbed her go-bag, a heavy-duty canvas kit that smelled of antiseptic and farm animals, and threw in a small portable oxygen tank and a box of broad-spectrum antibiotics. She pulled on insulated bib overalls, heavy-duty snowmobile boots, and goggles. She didn't hesitate. Animals were her life because they were predictable. People like Coulter were a mess. But these were infants, the most helpless animals of all. The journey was a suicidal battle against the elements. Her heavy-duty Skidoo screamed as she throttled it, its single headlight cutting a frantic yellow cone in the blinding white. The wind tried to rip her from the seat, and drifts, solid as concrete, threatened to flip the machine. She navigated by instinct, by the memory of the trees, her jaw set, her entire focus on the single blinking light of Jack Coulter's cabin, a beacon in the abyss. 20 minutes later, Jack's back door burst open in an explosion of snow and ice. Sarah Jenkins stood in the doorway, framed like an Arctic apparition, her goggles frosted white. She ripped them off, her pale eyes sweeping the room in one terrifying all-encompassing glance. Coulter looking like a ghost. The K-9 poised for a fight. The boy huddled in blankets and the two tiny bundles on the rug. "Out of my way, Coulter," she commanded, shrugging off the snow-caked bag. She was on her knees instantly. She didn't coo or soothe. She was a mechanic looking at a broken engine. "Boiled water now and all the clean towels you have." She laid out her tools on a towel, stethoscope, syringes, vials. She pulled the tiny oxygen mask, one designed for a pug or a newborn lamb, and fitted it over Luna's face, cracking the valve on the tank. A quiet hiss of pure oxygen filled the mask. She listened to Luna's chest, her eyes closed. "Consolidation in the lower lobe," she muttered. "Pneumonia. Fast." She grabbed a large vial of antibiotics labeled for livestock. Her hands, chapped and rough, now moving with the precision of a surgeon. She drew a minuscule, impossibly precise dose into a tiny syringe, swabbed the infant's thigh, and administered the shot. She did the same for Noah. "He's heading the same way, just slower." Jack and Leo watched, frozen, as this whirlwind of raw competence took over the cabin. For 10 agonizing minutes, the only sound was the hiss of the oxygen and the howl of the storm. Then the wet clicking gasp in Luna's chest softened. The retractions eased. Her tiny hand, which had been clenched into a tight blue-white fist, uncurled. Sarah Jenkins sat back on her heels, pushing the wet hair from her face. She was exhausted, but her gaze was sharp as steel. She looked at Jack, then at Leo, who was still clutching the dinosaur backpack as if his life depended on it. She'd saved them, for now. "They'll live," she said, her voice flat. "At least for tonight." She began packing her kit, her movements sharp. "You're suspended, Coulter. You're a pariah, and you have 3 children here, one of them damn near dead, in the middle of a level 4 blizzard." Her pale eyes narrowed, locking onto the backpack in Leo's arms. "You want to tell me what the hell is really going on?" The question hung in the superheated air of the cabin, sharp and heavy. Sarah Jenkins's pale gray eyes were not accusatory. They were analytical, demanding data. She had just fought a blizzard and the specter of death for 3 children she didn't know. She had earned the right to an answer. Jack Coulter looked at this woman, this sinewy, exhausted veterinarian who smelled faintly of antiseptic and snow. He saw the competence in her rough, chapped hands, the intelligence in her unflinching gaze. He looked at Leo, huddled by the fire, his small body wrapped in wool, his eyes wide and ancient. He looked at the 2 infants, their breathing now steadier, deeper thanks to her intervention. And he looked at Kilo, who sat alert by the hearth, no longer fixated on the door, but on Sarah. The dog, trained to read human intent, was calm, his posture relaxed. Kilo trusted her. That was enough for Jack. "It's not my story to tell," Jack said, his voice rough. He walked over to the fire and knelt, bringing himself down to the boy's level. "Leo, your mom. She told you to bring that bag to me, right?" Leo nodded, his grip tightening on the dinosaur print strap. "She said, don't let Uncle Marcus get it." Give it to Officer Coulter. He'll know what to do. Jack's throat tightened. Amelia hadn't just been his informant. She had been a friend, a terrified woman caught in a trap. And he had been too slow, too compromised to save her. I know, Leo. I'm him. I'm Coulter. He held out his hand. She sent me that bag because she trusted me to protect you, and I will. But to do that, I need to see what's inside it. Is that okay? Leo stared at Jack's outstretched hand, his gaze flickering between the detective and the dog who had saved him. He saw the K9's calm, the man's exhaustion, and the gentle way he spoke. Slowly, agonizingly, the boy unzipped the main compartment and pulled out an object wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. He didn't hand it over. He placed it on the floor between them. It was a standard portable hard drive. Sarah Jenkins let out a low whistle. Jesus, Coulter, what did you get this woman into? Jack ignored the jab, his focus entirely on the drive. He retrieved his personal laptop from his go bag, an old, heavy, non-department model wiped clean of any network software. He never trusted the cloud. He plugged the drive in. The machine whirred, recognizing the hardware. A single password-protected folder appeared. Amelia's birthday, he muttered, typing in the 8 digits he'd seen on her intake forms. Access granted. The folder opened, revealing a meticulously organized nightmare. It wasn't just a few files. It was a digital archive of systematic, cold-blooded evil compiled by a woman who knew she was going to die. Sarah, you're going to want to hear this. He clicked the first file, an audio recording. The cabin filled with the sound of a polite boardroom-style conversation. Voice 1, male, smooth, confident, dripping with the expensive, unhurried cadence of old money and private schools. Jack recognized it instantly, Marcus Thorne. The liquidation of the trust is the final step, Evelyn, but it cannot proceed while the primary beneficiary and, regrettably, her issue are still a legal factor. Voice 2, female. This voice was the real shock. It wasn't the voice of a thug. It was crisp, aristocratic, and sharp with impatience. Tom Fawn, Evelyn Hayes, a woman known for her charity work and her tough-on-crime rulings. Your sister-in-law is a loose end, Marcus. She was seen meeting with that Coulter, that rabid dog of a detective. She's compromised. Marcus, I understand. The accident for her car is already arranged. The storm will provide perfect cover. But the children, the assets, Judge Hayes. The children, she snapped, are irrelevant. Once Amelia is gone, I will declare them wards of the state. Their custody will fall under my jurisdiction. I will sign the transfer papers. They will be moved to the Midwest facility, and they will be lost. The trust will dissolve. You get your money, Marcus. Just be clean. And Coulter? Judge Hayes, a cold, dry laugh, Coulter has been handled. His suspension is indefinite. By the time he crawls out from under his internal affairs review, the children will be gone. The money will be offshore, and he will be just another disgraced cop with a drinking problem. The audio file ended. The cabin was deathly silent, save for the fire and the wind. Sarah Jenkins, who had been leaning against the wall, now stood bolt upright, her face pale, her knuckles white. That's Judge Hayes, she whispered. She speaks at the Rotary Club. Jack didn't answer. He clicked on the next folder labeled Financials. The screen filled with scanned documents, forged custodial transfer requests for children Jack had never heard of, all pre-signed by Judge Hayes, offshore bank statements from shell corporations in Thorne's name, and a digital copy of a life insurance policy taken out on Amelia, listing Marcus Thorne as the sole beneficiary, dated 3 weeks ago. It was a franchise. Amelia and her children weren't the first. They were just the ones who fought back. The final file was a text document named, For Jack. He opened it. It was a letter from Amelia, written the day before. Jack, if you are reading this, Marcus 1. He's coming. I know he is. Judge Hayes runs everything. She uses her power in family court to identify orphan children with large unsupervised trusts. Marcus, as a trust lawyer, finds the loopholes. They've been doing this for years. They disappear the children into private out-of-state adoption rings and they liquidate the assets. When I found out what they did to my late husband's estate, I tried to stop them. They threatened me. I came to you. Then they had you suspended. I know they'll make my death look like an accident. I can't protect my babies. Marcus will get them. Please, Jack. I'm sending them to you. It's the only chance they have. The road to your cabin is the only one they won't watch. They think you're a drunk, broken man. They don't know you. Protect my children. Avenge us. Amelia. Jack closed the laptop, the click echoing in the small room. He looked at Sarah. Her face was a mask of cold fury. So, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You're not a suspended cop. You're a target. And these children, they're not just orphans, Jack finished, his voice like gravel. They're witnesses, and they're the evidence. The immediate terrifying reality of their situation settled over them. The storm that had trapped them, that had nearly killed the children, was also the only thing protecting them. The blizzard was their only ally. As long as it raged, Marcus and his men couldn't get up the mountain. As long as the plows were grounded, they were safe. The hiss of the oxygen tank, the crackle of the fire. The cabin was a tiny, warm island in an ocean of lethal cold. Sarah finally sat down at the table, running a hand through her damp, graying hair. Okay, Coulter, we're in this. The children are stable. The storm is our cover. We wait it out, and when it breaks, she stopped. Her words were cut short by a sound. Not from the storm, not from the children. It came from Kilo. The German shepherd, who had been resting peacefully by the fire, was now on his feet. He had moved with silent, fluid grace, not to the back door where he'd first found the children, but to the front door, the door that faced the only road up the mountain. He wasn't barking. He wasn't whining. His head was low, his ruff slightly raised. And from deep in his chest came a sound that made the blood freeze in Jack's veins. A low, vibrating, barely audible rumble. It was the sound Kilo made just before a raid. The sound he made when the threat was no longer distant. It was the sound of an enemy at the gate. The sound was not the storm. The wind shrieked and howled, a physical assault on the cabin's walls. But this new sound was an insurgency from within. It was Kilo. The German shepherd stood locked in place, a 90-pound statue of coiled muscle, his gaze fixed on the front door. The sound he made was a low subsonic rumble, a vibration that Jack felt in the floorboards and in the fillings of his teeth. It was the sound of a predator identifying its rival. It was the sound of contact. Sarah Jenkins froze, her hand still on her medical bag. Leo, who had just begun to relax by the fire, went rigid, his eyes snapping from the dog to the door. He knew that sound. It was the sound of him. Jack, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. What is that? Jack didn't answer. He was already moving, his stocking feet silent on the wood floor. He put a single finger to his lips, signaling silence, then pointed for Sarah to move to the side of the room, away from the windows, taking Leo with her. She did, hurting the boy behind the solid mass of the stone fireplace. Jack clicked off the main lamp, plunging the cabin into the flickering, deceptive light of the fire. Kilo's growl continued, the frequency rising almost imperceptibly. He wasn't barking. This wasn't an alert. It was a warning. Jack crept to the front window, his body flat against the wall, and angled his head just enough to peek through a sliver in the frosted glass. The blizzard was a vortex of white, a chaotic, churning void. Then he saw it. Two bright yellow headlights piercing the maelstrom, attached to a massive tracked vehicle. It wasn't a truck. It wasn't a snowmobile. It was a snowcat, a heavy-duty grooming machine, its engine a deep thoracic throb that shrugged off the blizzard as a minor inconvenience. It was the kind of machine used by ski resorts or power companies. The kind of machine that cost $250,000. The kind of machine Marcus Thorne could acquire with a single phone call. The machine lumbered to a halt 10 yards from the porch. The engine idled, a confident, arrogant growl in the storm. 3 figures disembarked. The first was Marcus Thorne. Even in the blizzard, he looked composed, encased in a sleek black, expensive-looking ski jacket. He was a man in his late 40s with the kind of cruel chiseled handsomeness that photographs well. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, seemingly untouched by the wind, his jawline sharp, his features patrician. He was not a man built for wilderness. He was a man built to own it. He was flanked by 2 others. The first, who had been driving the snowcat, was a mountain of a man, wide and thick in a heavy-duty work coat. He moved with a professional, unhurried competence, his face obscured by a thick beard and a wool cap pulled low. He looked like an oil rig worker, solid and dangerous. The second man was the opposite. He was wiry, nervous, his movements jerky. He wore a thin, fashionable jacket, insufficient for the cold, and he kept patting his pockets, his eyes darting everywhere. He was the loose cannon, the enforcer. Jack stepped back from the window, his mind racing. They were here. The storm hadn't been enough. He had a suspended badge, a veterinarian, a 7-year-old, 2 infants, and a dog against 3 men, one of whom had just murdered his sister-in-law. He couldn't fight them. He had to play them. He looked at Sarah, his face hardening, changing. The desperate suspended cop vanished. Detective Coulter took his place. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and firm. "You are Dr. Jenkins, a neighbor. You're here on a medical call. Say nothing else. Let me handle this." Sarah, reading his intent, nodded once, her face becoming a mask of professional concern. A heavy authoritative knock banged on the door. Kilo let out a single sharp bark. "Quiet, Kilo," Jack commanded. He took a breath, smoothed his features into a look of tired annoyance, and opened the door. The wind blasted in, carrying Marcus Thorne with it. "Mr. Coulter." "Detective Coulter," Marcus said, his voice a perfect symphony of manufactured panic and relief. He brushed snow off his expensive jacket, his eyes, cold and blue, scanning the room. "My God, am I too late? Are they here? My sister-in-law, Amelia, her car. We found it down the trail. God, is she?" He performed his grief perfectly, his hand even coming up to his mouth, his voice breaking. It was a flawless performance. "She's not here," Jack said, his voice flat, playing his own part. "But the children are. Marcus's.